Welcome to Channel Edge, the podcast where channel leaders share success strategies, best practices, and emerging trends. Brought to you by 360 Insights, the channel success platform.
Hey, welcome everyone to another episode of Channel Edge, 360 Insights view into everything channel. I'm your host, Stephen Kellum. And today we're going to get into ecosystems and we're really going to talk about channel ecosystems. You know, ecosystems is a term, if you ask 50 people what it meant, you get many different answers, but I do believe they'd all be fairly close and it would track fairly well. You know, I first started having ecosystem conversations years ago when people were just trying to buy an MDF product, and I ran an MDF company. And I would sit down with a buyer, and there was no way I could talk to them or we could talk to them about MDF without drawing a big circle on the board and looking at the ecosystem and looking at what made it up. Because even MDF or incentives, the world that we live in, 10 years ago, you knew you weren't alone. You couldn't do it alone. You had to have an ecosystem. And I remember having conversations with people that like, an eco what? And it was all about an ecosystem. And you had to have PRM and you had to have TCMA and you had to understand where LMS stood. And so all these pieces that came together to make up an ecosystem. And today in this complex channel world, I think it's really involved quite a bit. And it's not just about an ecosystem anymore. Really today, it's about an orchestration or management of an ecosystem. So joining us today to talk about that topic, that very relevant topic, is James Hodgkinson, who's the founder and CEO at Webinfinity. James, thanks for joining us.
Hey, great to be here.
Yeah, I was really looking forward to this one because ecosystem orchestration, I was saying around the house the other day, my wife is that a made up term? I was going, it kind of is, but it's got a great ring to it. And some folks may have heard ecosystem management. Some folks may have heard ecosystem orchestration. By the way, it kind of is the same thing. And maybe you could tell us a little bit about what ecosystem orchestration really is. Actually, hold on. Let me take a step back. Before you do that, maybe you can let some of our listeners know who you are and a little bit about Webinfinity, and then we'll go into ecosystem orchestration.
Yeah, sure. Just a bit of background on myself and Webinfinity. I've been at this for pretty much 2 decades. I stumbled into ecosystem or PRM management through the formation of a bedroom business back in the UK many years ago, where we got on the radar of a company called Computer Associates, who asked us to build a lot of tools for their channel partner program. That was, a long time ago before such tools really existed. So, we kind of had an apprenticeship of learning through a lot of projects with a small number of companies. We started to build up the business in that image. I moved to the US 10 years ago, and we had a lot of nice clients doing a lot of great development work. But about 5 years ago, we decided to pivot completely to what became Webinfinity. It's the same team and a lot of the same concepts behind it. But the reason we did that is we just started to see the old ways weren't working, and there was a need for a new type of technology in the market. So Webinfinity is a software as a service platform delivered on a cloud basis, and really what it solves for is the automation of user experience, so you can more effectively engage different types of users without the heavy lift that normally goes with custom development. So we've been proving that out with some great clients over the past few years and some great partners, including 360. Excited to share a few of my thoughts on that with you today.
Well, it obviously has given you a front row seat to ecosystem orchestration or ecosystem management. And so maybe you can start with defining that a little bit. What is ecosystem orchestration?
Yeah, it's funny. You talked about the buzzwords and the technical terms and what does this really mean. So I think sometimes the way I like to explain it is you just really boil it down to the essence of what we're talking about and use a more understandable example like in our consumer life. So, really all of these platforms we're becoming used to, whether or not it's LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, they're all types of ecosystems, and the monetization of those communities, those projects has been owned by the orchestrator, whoever is helping drive the behavior of those communities. So really, there's a huge upside in successfully pulling that off. If you're the one global platform for business professionals like LinkedIn, the ecosystem orchestrator has a tremendous benefit from being able to do that. So really, if you start to transpose that onto more of our business to business interactions, it's really the same thing. It's like, how can we take the ecosystems that we're a part of, and play a lead role in orchestrating them. So if I'm a private company like Webinfinity, how am I engaging my customers, my partners, my employees, my suppliers, all in a very effective way? And also, what other ecosystems are there out there that I need to be trying to become a part of? So we're all members of multiple ecosystems today. Somebody's orchestrating them all. It's just the winners are going to be the ones that work out how to do it most effectively.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to ask you. Why is it so important today versus maybe historically to get there? I think you kind of answered that, is they're going to be the winners. But why did it all come together now? Why are we just talking about ecosystem orchestration now when clearly it's been going on for 10 or 15 years, right? In some sort of fashion. It's just interesting. Did it just become vogue, or did people just realize it's a big competitive advantage? Or is it the CX to PX and having to have that experience, that great experience all the way down to the consumer or partner level, right?
Yeah, well, sorry, Stephen, I think the reason it's becoming such a hot topic now is because of the execution opportunity. So to your point, this has been there forever. If you were somebody running a membership organization, sending out letters, or running a networking group, you were orchestrating an ecosystem. You were taking that role, that responsibility. But one of the reasons that we pivoted to this new tech platform at Webinfinity was we started to see what was happening in the consumer world with the mass scale automated orchestration of ecosystems and how powerful that was becoming, because you didn't have to manually mail things out and create custom experiences. There was a sort of like supply and demand that these companies were managing, and these ecosystems started to self-sustain because the users created the content, they shared the information with each other. So in B2B, we're starting to catch up and realize that that's an opportunity that's like never before, in the same way that marketing automation was a huge opportunity in the last decade. So I would say why it's becoming so important now is that there's opportunities to automate and scale in ways that just didn't exist a few years ago.
And that makes a lot of sense, right? If you take the expectations at the B2B level, and I think that is the CX to PX, right? The customer experience to partner experience, and trying to take that up into the B2B. If you throw that technology into it, that makes it much easier to do. Then it totally makes sense. And if you look at the technology advancements that have taken place, that you can have this UI UX overlay, you can have a single data layer, you can have standard APIs. It's really easy to flow all those sort of pieces together. It makes a lot of sense. So here's a question for you. Is this now, for our listeners, and the vast majority are OEMs, vendors, and technology manufacturer, appliances space, is this a nice to have now? Or is this, you gotta have this now? Or, is it a huge competitive advantage right now for everybody? Because I don't see everybody doing it.
Yeah, well, I think, again, everybody's doing it to the point of the fact that if you have a business or a project that's got more than 3 individuals, a customer, an employee, and a supplier, you have an ecosystem, and you are to some degree trying to orchestrate it. It's just how well are you doing it and how seriously are you taking that? So I think the real opportunity, because this is, still very embryonic in many regards, is the companies that can actually get there sooner in doing a much better job and to start to automate more of those interactions are going to have a significant advantage. And one of the interesting things when you look at this purely from a user experience point of view, and why Webinfinity is so focused on that part of it in particular, is that the engagement of the user is really everything. Because it's a bit like looking at Amazon. Whatever they're doing in the back office and however well they're managing the supply chain and the order delivery, if their website is unusable and people can't sign up and create experiences or receive recommendations or buy the product, they're going to fail. And I think too many businesses at the moment have a very poor approach to the front end. They're still solving for this through more classical web design type of approaches, or using more legacy PRM systems, which aren't really engaging for the user, and they're not really capitalizing on that opportunity. So, obviously that's a big part of what we're focused on at Webinfinity. But I think the user experience and the engagement of the user is mission critical now. That's the key change.
Well, look, I think everyone agree that user experience really matters, right? And I don't think there's anybody in our space in the channel that would disagree with that. And I think everyone agree that the technology and even the AI there to understand what that user, B2B or B2C, is looking for, and the ability to glean information from what they do. The biggest challenge I see is data, because some of the big customers that we've had or that I've worked through the years, there's not a lot of orchestration. When you put marketing and you put sales operations and you put sales together and you have finance together, and and you've got this buyer at the end who has multiple touch points, they're not sharing data. So you could have this beginnings of an ecosystem orchestration where you're trying to create something for this end user, but if all that data is not there, if they're not integrated together and they're siloed, I think you're missing a huge part of it, and I still think there's a lot of that going on. Sorry, that was a really long question, and that I still think is a big challenge.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the ways I try to explain this is really like a big supply and demand challenge. So, the architecture, and this is complex because we're not dealing with just consumers uploading photographs on Instagram. We're talking about multiple types of organizations and entities with different variables like region, language, level in your partner program, etc. So there's a lot of variables that just don't exist in the consumer sense. But it's impossible to hold and manage all that data on behalf of an ecosystem. That's proven, already when you look at the analogy of something like Facebook. Imagine them trying to hold the data on the billions of people who use it versus having each of the members of the ecosystem create the data on themselves. So that person who signs up, invites their friends, clicks on the links, the likes. So I think the companies that are going to win here have got to start to think about it the same way. How can we make the ecosystem members drive their own supply and demand through giving to get in the data sense? And they're the ones then who are maintaining the information. The job of the ecosystem orchestrator is then to map out the supply and demand that says, right, if we need to get that partner, this content, those resources, these tools, these reports to be successful, how can we feed the other end of that effectively? And that does lead into a lot of the challenges you just spoke to. But there are ways to solve it now, because if you look at things like what Gartner are writing about on the Composable Enterprise, the back office is becoming more of a composable and integratable thing.
Right, I agree, and that makes a ton of sense, right? And basically, I'm not a huge technical person. You can take all that data and it can be sitting in those silos, and it can be stored there in those silos. But then you have the technology to access in real time that information, figure out what you need it for, and then use it, and then it still stays stored in the same place. Is that fairly accurate?
Well, yeah, and absolutely. And there's also, the other thing to bear in mind as well is that there's an awful lot of this is irrelevant to the needs of the user. So, the person who's engaging with you in the ecosystem is going to be really reliant on a very small subset of all this stuff. They don't need to see all your 5 years of, sales data and all of this kind of stuff. So again, what we're finding has helped is really start from the personas and the needs of the users. So instead of trying to get the integration of all the data sources and all the systems done in the abstract, start to think about what are the priorities in the business and how can we set up the data model to support that. And sometimes that's using practical methods. How can I get these spreadsheets that exist everywhere in one place? And we've worked with other pioneers in data, companies like Snowflake and Matillion and Sigma for visualization, who are focused all on that part of it. So it's when you start to join these different bits of the puzzle together, same as the relationship we're developing with 360 Insights to connect incentives and behavior to a user experience. This is when it gets powerful, because not one company is going to be able to solve all of that.
No, absolutely. And that's my next question is, what does this look like for the next 12 months or the next 24 months? I mean, we're definitely hearing more and more about this. Are we on a fast pace to this, right? Or what do you think the acceleration curve looks like?
Well, it's interesting. I'll refer to Gartner put a hype cycle out on this very recently. They recognize this as being in the very early stages with 1 to 5 year maturity horizon, and then a very big long term kind of future for what and it was their actual term, ecosystem orchestration, that I first started to adopt. So I think we're in the very early stages, and what that always tells you is that there is enough maturity to execute now. There are a number of other tools, platforms, solutions, and methodologies that are out there that can really help drive this forward. But this is where you're going to have early mover opportunities. The company that do this really well versus the ones that stay stuck in the sort of legacy era and continue doing the same things that they've done for the last 5 or 10 years are going to have a significant advantage/disadvantage. So I think this will definitely not be wholesale change across all of these B2B organizations in the next year or two, but I think there's real early mover opportunities and pioneers that can actually get a long way ahead if they start to embrace this sooner than others.
Well, you have some examples. There's clients that we're working with together that are out there. I won't name them, but they're large, either storage or networking companies out there that are already moving towards this. And you've been working with them for a while. So 2 questions. One is, what are some of the challenges that they have faced as they've gone through this? And then come back around with, what are some of the upsides? What are sort of the benefits and some of the positive things they've seen out of this?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to that challenge as to almost being how this has all evolved in the time we've been out there pushing this. So, I think one of the biggest challenges is organizationally, partner and alliances businesses have been somewhat separated from the rest of the business. So you have, direct sales and marketing teams, and then you have what has traditionally been that red-headed stepchild of partner. And when really it's all one thing, it's all around world-class customer experience and being able to connect the dots. So traditionally, one of the challenges we've had and some of the stakeholders that we've worked with in our clients is that they've only had responsibility for one part of that, which is why there's a thing called PRM, because why is it just for partners? Why isn't, all of this one big challenge? So we were almost, for a while having to position or market what we did more as PRM, even though it was a lot more than that. What we're starting to see now, particularly with our most visionary customers and where they are strategically more on board with this vision, is that they're starting to look at this as one connected challenge, not in silos. So I think that's going to continue to be a trend moving forward, but the companies that take this seriously from the beginning and start to think about the whole ecosystem as one thing and not in separate categories of persona and silos, I think are going to get there quicker.
Yeah, and the success that they've seen, right? Maybe you can talk a little bit about that, what that feedback has been from that end user perspective. And I'm really curious how that has gone and what sort of results they're seeing.
Yeah, so I mean, I think we've done quite a good job of getting proactive in educating and enabling, because the truth is, if you structure the information architecture correctly around this, it doesn't matter really from a tech perspective what the variables are. The variable could be a customer, a partner, an employee, a supplier, the regions, the languages. So the way we approached it at Webinfinity was, if you can create enough flexibility to educate technology rather than hard code it around certain types of users, it then becomes much easier to explain to a client, well, you could do the same thing in a different scenario. So yeah, you've done a great job now of turning on, great support and access for your channel partners, but how about we now focus on your analyst community or your influencers or your marketplace partners? Because it's just another type of persona. And Again, now what about the employees? Why aren't they in this conversation? So I think that started to be really interesting, and you'll see in the evolution of some of our projects and accounts and case studies that we're now starting to really be very clear about that opportunity and working with some companies that really get it. So it's a process, but it's starting to really, the penny's starting to drop in lots of places.
Okay, that's great. Hey, James, thank you for dropping in and spending some time talking about ecosystem orchestration. So if our listeners would like to get in touch with you, they'd like to hear a little bit more about those case studies, what's the best way for them to get connected with you?
Yeah, so other than looking up Webinfinity, I'm very active on LinkedIn and Twitter. I'm also part of an expert community with a project called the Channel Marketplace, which you can refer to for a number of other great channel technologies and ask questions of the community there. But yeah, probably the best place to start is LinkedIn, and I'd love to connect with any of the community out there that are interested to talk more on this topic.
Okay. Hey, James, thanks for joining us. I appreciate it. Listeners, thanks for tuning in. Appreciate you taking some time. If you have ideas for future shows, if you want to connect or comment, please feel free to email us at channeledge@360insights.com. Also, if you enjoy the show, please do share with your colleagues. And remember to subscribe using your favorite podcast platforms, iTunes, Stitcher Radio, Google Play, Spotify, wherever you get your great content. Once again, thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to Channel Edge, brought to you by 360 Insights, the channel success platform. Subscribe now on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and Google Play, and you'll always be the first to access new episodes where channel leaders share success strategies, best practices, and emerging trends. For bookings, feedback, questions, or comments, feel free to email us at channeledge@360insights.com.